Harvey? Wrong, Batman. I'm not Harvey. I am Two-Face.
These videos are not for children. If you're a children, then piss off.
Hey there, it's me, your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso. And at this point in time, I'm sure a lot of you are probably well aware that I'm a bit of a Batman fan. But what you might not know is that I'm also very much a Two-Face fan. The guy is one of my all-time favorite, not just Batman villains, but villains overall. Mainly because his diabolical schemes aren't rooted in some need to try to take over the world, but are instead deeply intertwined with his tragically torn psyche. I can get more into depth about what makes Two-Face such a tragic, almost Shakespearean character, but maybe doing so in a video about the 1960s Batman, maybe that's just not the right medium. Despite Two-Face being one of my favorite characters and one of the all-time great Batman baddies, he's still very often overlooked and underutilized. Sometimes his appearances in Batman-related content amount to absolutely nothing. Like, for example, in the Arkham franchise, Two-Face is a prominent character, but he still does next to nothing throughout the series run. Or like in the show Gotham. It gave us Harvey Dent, but he only made a handful of appearances here and there for name recognition. He's never really a major factor in anything on the show, and the show never shows his transformation into the Two-Face character. There's a bunch of Batman content out there that only shows the character as a background nod, a reference, or a cameo. He's usually not important or vital to what's going on. Then there's other times that the character is disregarded altogether. The character never makes an appearance in the animated show The Batman, and he didn't even appear in the classic 1960s Batman series. Or did he? It's kind of complicated.
You could say we're of two minds on the subject.
It certainly is odd to think that the classic 60s Batman series managed to bring in such obscure characters like the Clock King, Killer Moth, and Falseface, and even managed to introduce newer obscure characters like the Bookworm, the Puzzler, King Tut, and Egghead, and yet they never managed to incorporate Two-Face. Well, it seems like there was a reason for that, actually. The creators of the show did initially want to bring in the character due to his popularity, but it was ultimately decided that it might be a little bit too gruesome for what was essentially a Saturday morning cartoon show minus the cartoon. Which, it's pretty understandable. I mean, it doesn't break my heart any less, but I get where they're coming from. Yeah, a guy getting acid thrown into his face, forever disfiguring him and leading him deeper into an already present insanity probably was a little bit too much for the kids of the 60s. The idea was brought up on at least two different occasions. One of which being closer toward the beginning of the show's success, somewhere during the first or second season. As a matter of fact, the idea got so far along that a two-part script, how appropriate, entitled The Two-Way Crimes of Two-Face, Parts 1 and 2, was actually made. But unfortunately, it was ultimately decided against, for the reasons that I previously stated. And then the idea was proposed again in the show's later run when ratings were on a bit of a decline. The thought process was introducing established villains from the comics that the show hadn't seen already might give the show a boost. So there were talks to introduce Two-Face and the Scarecrow alike. What else could you say but, holy desperation, Batman! The idea was to try to get Clint Eastwood to sign on, and what a picture that is.
You've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
Red alert! Red alert!
It's kind of hard to imagine how the Western tough guy was going to fit in with this campy, magical world of Batman 66, but I would give any amount of money to find out. Apparently, Clint Eastwood was very friendly with the show's Robin, Burt Ward, so things were looking pretty promising. But again, unfortunately, this would never come to pass, as the show would be canceled before the character could debut. So that's why we didn't get Two-Face during the show's original run. Now, personally, I always thought that Tommy Lee Jones' performance in Batman Forever made up for the character's lack of appearance in the original series. Based on the hammy acting, the hokey schemes, and the flamboyant attire, I think this version of the character would fit right in place with the rest of the 66 cast. You tell me you can't see him standing side by side with those other villains in the Batman the movie. I think it's a pretty spot-on interpretation of what could have been, and maybe that's part of the reason I have some love for it. A lot more love than a lot of other people seem to have for it. It's nice to imagine that this is what was originally intended. But luckily, this wouldn't be the end for our dual-faced friend, as the original scripts for Two-Face's appearance in the series were later utilized in 2015 when creating a comic book called Batman 66, The Lost Episode. The comic book is heavily adapted from the original script, which is also heavily adapted from another Batman comic book, Batman 68, The New Crimes of Two-Face. In The Lost Episode, the character does seem to vaguely resemble actor Clint Eastwood. Not to a T, mind you. I don't think anyone's going to see this and immediately go, oh, that's Dirty Harry. But if you do go into reading this book knowing who it was they wanted to cast in the role, you take one look at that character and you're like, oh shit, look, it's young Gran Torino. Like in Batman Forever, the comic starts with Harvey already been villainized. No longer handsome Harvey Dent. He's already Two-Face, the coin-flipping criminal. Now, what's interesting is that in this comic, Two-Face's use of the coin doesn't just determine whether he will or won't commit a crime. It determines if he'll either commit a crime or do a good deed. And I don't know about you, but I kind of dig that approach to the character, because this much better emulates the duality of Two-Face. It's not just the bad and the tolerant, it's the bad and the good. There's two opposing sides of this man. He was once a heroic figure, even if he didn't wear a mask. Of course, such a story might only be able to exist in the Batman 66 canon, because having Two-Face attempt to rob a bank and then ending that arc with him opening up a savings account and giving a pricey donation to that bank, might be a little bit too goofy for modern comics. As always, like most good Two-Face stories, and even some bad ones come to think of it, Two-Face is defeated when Batman manages to find a way to use his own psychosis and coin obsession against him. Nearly identical to a scene straight out of the animated series, which apparently actually borrowed it from this original script. It's definitely worth the look if you could get your hands on it. I really enjoyed this personally, and I was sort of hoping that the series would continue, and we'd be able to see at least 2 Two-Face stories, but this, to my knowledge, has been the only time he's been featured in it. This appearance would later be retconned anyway when the animated follow-up to the 60s show, Batman vs. Two-Face, was released. Except this time, he doesn't resemble the man with no name. He resembles Captain Kirk. Yes, that's right. This animated feature got none other than William Shatner to portray my favorite villain. And this movie sure does have an alternate take on the character. Here, Harvey is of course a coin-flipping force of good as Gotham's DA. In this version of events, Doctor Strange, yeah, he's here too, it's a shock for me as well, is trying to extract the evil from the show's major supervillains, and also Egghead. But their evil overwhelms the machine, causing an evil explosion that knocks into Harvey, thus creating Two-Face. And if it sounds dumb, that's only because it is. But it's just the right amount of dumb in fitting with the original series. And the movie is also fairly aware of its own stupidity. Following an opening montage that shows the many crimes of Two-Face, we're shown him following a corrective surgery after his rehabilitation. Despite Harvey's turn to the good side, crimes begin happening around Gotham City in twos, and all clues lead to you-know-who. This leads to the revelation that despite the surgery, Harvey's mental scarring hasn't healed, and he still falls back into his old antics despite his best attempts. His evil half remanifests itself physically as it does mentally. How is it possible that even the cartooniest of Batman canons still understands the deep psychological plight of Harvey Dent? I mean, yes, they address it in the campiest way imaginable, but still, they actually address it. Props to them, I am very pleasantly surprised. Two-Face's nefarious schemes seem to be attempting to duplicate, no pun intended, his own condition, turning Gothamites into their own worst enemies. Until ultimately, surprise surprise, our dear Dark Knight manages to save the day. But Batman finds himself in another battle against his old friend, as Harvey's evil half completely takes over his psyche and appearance. Eventually, Batman of course uses a coin trick, this time using a trick coin without a face on either side, which triggers Harvey to take center stage and fight back. Two-Face is defeated not by Batman, but by Harvey Dent himself. And for a movie that's based on a show that is so camptastic in nature, I am truly astounded at how well done this is. Again, and they still manage to make it fit into that world of Batman. So as you can see, when it comes to Two-Face in Batman, there's two truths. He made 2 appearances in 2 separate continuities, and by saying Two-Face wasn't in the 1960s Batman series, that statement is both true and false at the same time, which I personally think is perfectly poetic for the Two-Face character. So there you have it. With that being said, I was your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso, and I thank you for joining me. Hope to see you in the next one. If you enjoyed this video and the sound of my voice, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you aren't already, then head on over to my Twitter where you can follow me, and it's not considered stalking. And also, I got an Instagram. I really don't know how to use the thing, but I have a girlfriend who's trying to teach me how. So, if you're patient with me, I'm sure we can figure it out together.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.